All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for just joining us. We're happy to be joined by Ms. Lauren Devoll with Twitter, and without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to her.
Thanks, Kwande. It's really good to be here with everyone in this virtual room together. I really wish we could be in person, but you know what? I really just hope for the most part that you and your loved ones are staying safe during this time and learning how to juggle so many different priorities, including the accounts that you manage. So thank you for having me here today. Like Kwande said, my name is Lauren Devoll. I'm on the public policy team at Twitter, and it's my job to make sure that you are equipped with the most effective and creative content strategies out there. I want you to know what's trendy, what's happening, and today in particular, how to use Twitter when it comes to crisis and response. We're going to go through a whole suite of best practices, from what you should do in blue sky times to really when things are urgent and people are watching. But there's going to be a range of content mixed in there, so just stay tuned with me today. I know you're responsible for creating a lot of content for also a lot of different platforms. So I just wanted to take a whole 30 seconds here and remind you why Twitter is different and how it's different from the other platforms you're creating content for. Twitter's mission is to serve the public conversation. It's really that simple. And I underline the word public here because that is one of the defining characteristics of Twitter that makes it different from the others. Twitter is public by default, meaning you don't have to have a Twitter account to see tweets. It's also part of the reason that tweets are flashed up on TV and embedded in news articles and web properties all over the internet. When you're creating tweets, it's not just for Twitter, it's for the entire internet ecosystem. And that's also part of the reason it's such a powerful tool when it does come to crisis and emergency response. The second word that's included there, not underlined, but equally as important, is conversation. And I want this to stick with you. This is our big idea for today, and conversation is a big theme that we're going to hit, especially at the top of our time together. Here's our roadmap for today. Part of being effective during crisis and emergency response is ensuring that you are a trusted member of the ecosystem before disaster ever strikes. And guess what? There's no magic button to get more followers. Sorry to spoil the surprise there. Expanding your audience on Twitter is all about consistent use of best practices and relevant timing. So we're going to start with the best practices you should be utilizing all the time to establish trust with your audience. The next section we're going to dive right into is what you should be doing to set up Twitter ahead of time so that you're easily consuming content that's relevant and timely. And then the third thing we'll go through is back to basics. How should be using Twitter if an emergency were ever to come into your sphere? It's really, really, really important that the Twitter audience has a strong first impression of you. And your profile space is the space that you do that, especially if they're coming to you during an emergency. They need to know you're legit. And that starts with a really strong profile that includes social proof by linking your website. It's one of the most simple things you can do to let people know that you are a legit source and have a completely established profile. I would also recommend that you use your official domain and don't try and shorten that up. Let's not do the bit.ly link here, because this is what shows us a degree of transparency of where we're actually going offline. In addition to your website link, you'll want a short bio here. And let's keep the alphabet soup out of it if possible, please. I know we love a good acronym over here. But your bio is one of the spaces that's key to our search algorithm. And random strings of letters are not really going to help that. So if there's words you want to be connected with in search, this is one of the most powerful places to do that. The absolute most powerful place to be elevated in search is your display name, and that's that bold lettering you're seeing right here from the Department of Defense. By the way, love the little flag after it. That's a really creative and cute addition there. We'll come back to the display name later because there's a really interesting tactic I want you to walk away with when it comes to crisis and emergency response. And then, of course, that header image right there. All of these elements that I'm pointing to right now are requirements for the coveted little blue badge of verification. And I'm sure there's some of you in here who manage accounts on official purposes, military purposes, that really want that blue badge. I'll give you instructions at the end for how we can make sure that that is implemented on your accounts. But for starters, what you need to know is it has to be a completely robust, filled out profile in order to qualify for that kind of verification. Now, for my pro users in the room who just started snoozing because they're like, I got it, we do this all the time, zone back in for a second, and I want to let you in on a little secret and pro tip that a lot of our big brands and kind of the more playful accounts on Twitter are really implementing. And that is not just using your profile space as something that you set and forget, but a profile place that is very tuned into the conversation and shows exactly how relevant you are. So this isn't a static space. Your profile can be a very dynamic space, and you can change out elements that showcase and highlight particular moments that you want to be especially engaged on. And this is one of my favorites. Of course, I'm biased getting to work for Twitter, but also particularly on the NASA Space Perseverance launch that just happened. So some things that at Twitter did here to their profile to really raise awareness to that launch. They updated their bio to just be a really short, snappy, playful set of words. They updated their profile picture, which, by the way, is one of the most interesting things you can make, changes you can make on your profile. Why? Because it goes outbound with every single tweet. And they updated their header image to show a homage to Perseverance as she made her way to Mars. So I want you to think about this space as a place that definitely you're setting to establish trust, but in key moments when you really want to show up and show you're incredibly engaged in real-time relevant conversation, it's also a tool at your disposal to have a little bit of fun. And of course, your profile makes a pretty big statement, but you should also do so with every single outbound tweet. And this is one of the most important pieces to success on Twitter. Ready? Crafting your voice. Voice really matters on Twitter, like really, really. Did I say really? You have to tweet like a human talks. And this doesn't mean that you abandon information. It just means that you convey information with a little bit of personality. And that doesn't equate to being snarky. You don't need to be snarky on Twitter. What I mean is being conversational, because at the end of the day, social media is social. And in order to be social, you actually have to use that voice, not just to broadcast outbound to people, but to have dialogue and conversation with people. And I know this can be a really tough concept to sell to bosses who think Twitter is just an extension of the press release, but this is the truth. That being on Twitter and not having conversation with people is a little bit like going to a party, standing in a corner, shouting, and wondering why no one wants to come over and be friends with you. Social media is social. And if you want it to work, you have to be willing to go there to establish trust with your audience, which is what we are trying to do in this all the time content. Now, I know this is a room that loves a good checklist, so I'm gonna give you some checklists here to think about in all of your outbound content. And the very top of that checklist is thinking about how you can create consistently engaging content that really incorporates outbound conversational strategy. So I really want you to evaluate how many times you're not just broadcasting, but interacting with other users on Twitter. Are you using, this is a question you can ask yourself, are you using these 3 icons as more than just a metric for success? Another way to think a little bit about this is I don't want you to think about how many of these you're getting. I want you to proactively think about how many of these you are giving. Of course, there are appropriate metrics of success on how your content is doing in the ecosystem, but these are really, really powerful strategies of outbound conversation. Why? Because people will feel like you are not just talking at them, that you are talking with them. And it is one of the things that will hands down transform your influence, because people feel like they are seen, heard, there's someone behind the account. So 3 small icons, but 3 really big strategies. Those tools right there, the reply, the retweet, the like, those are all what I would call tools of conversation, but there's also tactics of conversation. One of them is very simple. Just look for it. A lot of the conversation is out there, and just don't be afraid to engage. Reply to fellow states, in this case, for the National Guard, to fellow servicemen and women, other people using Twitter. You should absolutely be engaging with people proactively like this. The other way, the other tactic of conversation that you can utilize is to actually invite conversation proactively to you with either conversational prompts or another example I'll show you here in just a little bit. But I love this one from the Air National Guard, which I've used before. So if this is a second time you're seeing it, lucky you. But what works really well about this is that we've kind of controlled our responses. I know it can be a little bit of a scary thing to invite people to reply to you. So what really works about this example here, and I'm just going to go to the top one more time, they are soliciting feedback and conversation from their audience in a way that's not quite as scary. They've given them options on the way that they can reply with these really cool pictures. And they've also given them very clear instructions on how to engage in that conversation. At the very top, it says, help pick this month's guard pick by replying with the number of your favorite photo below. So it sets people up really nicely to have these conversations that tend towards being very engaging. And the other example I wanted to show you here is from the US Naval Academy. I love this. They just kind of ask people to tell us more about your plebe class. And people totally did. This is one of my favorite responses. But this is where we find the social part of social media. This is where the humanity, the stories are, the opportunity to actually engage and dialogue. And so I want you to think very proactively about how you're looking for conversations and ways that you can be a part of it, or thinking about ways that you can invite conversation proactively. One of the best tactics and tools to invite conversation upon yourself is with a Twitter Q&A. And honestly, I could spend an entire training going through how to do a Twitter Q&A effectively, but we don't have the time for that. So I have a handy dandy little guide here for you. If you just hover your cell phone or device over this QR code here, it'll pop up with a link to a blog post that really walks through kind of the arc of how to do a Twitter Q&A, from announcing it to how you actually go about answering those questions. And then there's a pretty hefty Q&A, FAQs at the bottom there. So if you're curious about diving into this tactic, whether it be for recruiting or community building, especially while we're all virtual, this resource right here will really help guide you through that. All right, back to our checklist real quick, things that you should be doing in your outbound content as best practices that establish trust. That's what we're after here. 2 quick little content things here that'll really help elevate what you're doing. Use emojis as very simple visual call outs. You don't have to go crazy here, okay? You don't have to go crazy. I'll show you an example here in just a minute. And the second piece is using space to really break up dense content. Think about it. Our eyes are glancing really fast through this scrolling home timeline. How do we give ourselves a little bit more real estate and break up anything that will make it easier and snackable for the eye to digest? And then that last bullet right there, keep it concise. We just came out with a study that said the optimum amount of tweet characters is actually less than 100. So you have 280 characters in every single tweet to work with, but we're seeing a lot of strategy around short, concise copy, and it really takes off with people. So something to think about, and also show your boss whenever they are curious why the tweet copy is so short. You can tell them, hey, Twitter said so. Just 2 quick examples here that briefly illustrate what we were just talking about. Like I said, you don't have to go crazy with emojis, but you can use them as visual aids to help break up really dense content. Just make it a little bit more snackable. This example from the US Army does just that. They also utilize space really well. So they hit that return key after that first sentence and after that second sentence. So when we're scrolling through on the home timeline, we actually have a better shot of understanding what's being said here. Also a great example of a conversational prompt. And then that second piece of advice, keep it concise. And I'm use this screenshot here because Twitter Business is actually a great handle to follow if you are interested in knowing what some of the big brands are doing out there. If you're interested on best practices and case studies of how some other industries are approaching Twitter with consistent best practices, even inside the military, this is a really good follow for you at Twitter Business. Making our way through the checklist some more. I really want you to think about this one. Showcase, authenticity, and relevance. And what do I mean by that? I get asked all the time, how many times a day should I tweet? What's the best way to beat the algorithm? Okay, let's just back it up here. Going viral is really just producing content with the combination of authenticity and delivery and relevance to the conversation around you. And say relevance, think relevance, not ratio. Like, we're not trying to tweet a certain number of times a day. We're trying to tweet when we have something to say, when it's actually relevant for us to chime in and join the conversation. And the sound on this video won't work for this presentation, unfortunately, but it is absolutely worth a watch. This is Sergeant Major Grinston telling his story about when he was not sure how to identify himself in paperwork because of his biracial identity. It's a super powerful 130 seconds because of the conversations that are happening in our country right now. So definitely worth a watch. Please hover your phone over that QR code. It'll take you exactly to this tweet. You can save it for later for some content inspiration. Something else you should really take away about this particular tweet that I'm showing you is that it's not high lift. This is not a highly produced video. It was probably shot on an iPhone or Android. But it's really powerful because it's authentic, it's real, and it's really relevant to conversations that are happening more broadly. Quick sidebar about content that is moving but very low lift. This is a fun one for my iOS users in the house. You can turn your live photos into GIFs quite easily, actually. Oops, went a little bit too fast there. Live photos into GIFs. So anytime that you've taken a live photo on your iPhone and you upload it natively to our platform, you'll see that there's a little GIF icon in the lower left-hand corner there. Just tap that icon and it'll turn it into a GIF. It's a lot of fun. Okay, this is the last thing on our checklist for now as far as things we should consider when we want to be creating content that's really engaging and establishing trust with our audience. The other thing about that video that I just showed you is that it was uploaded directly. It didn't ask me to go to YouTube to see it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with YouTube, but I want you to think about when you already have your audience on a platform, don't ask them to go somewhere else. We already have their attention. We don't want to take away that opportunity for them to engage with us and actually just see our message. It's really important to meet people where they are and not ask them to go somewhere else. So if you're there and you're like, okay, Lauren, that's cool, but like my video is longer than 2 minutes and 20 seconds. How am I actually going to upload it directly to Twitter? Well, my friends, do I have a gift for you? This gift is called Media Studio, and perhaps some of you are already familiar with this pro tool we have. If you have never seen this before, it's because it's something we have to enroll you in. Not everyone on Twitter gets access to this. It's a special place where you get to organize and analyze your media. That's what we call Media Studio. And there's a lot of things you can do here. Again, we don't have time to go through them all today, but some of my favorites are called out on the screen. You can upload SRT files so that you have subtitles in every single video. There's a whole suite of analytics there that's different than what you would get in your normal Twitter.com experience. Of course, that 10-minute video upload is always a bonus. You can give distributed access to the account, so multiple contributors can have access to your media studio without being able to tweet from the account. And there's also a really great call to action button. Anytime that you upload a video and you want to be able to click out to your website from that video, there's a tool inside a Media Studio that allows you to do that. So hopefully you feel sufficiently teased. If you want access to this, I'll give you instructions at the end on how to get it. All right. So that was a really brief run through all of the content and strategy that you should be thinking about executing all the time so that you're establishing that trust with your audience. What are some things that you need to do ahead of time before any kind of crisis or emergency would actually be happening in your sphere so that you're easily able to get to matters of influence quickly, different audiences, and just kind of consume Twitter most efficiently? That's what this little section is about. First of all, you need to know how to get help when it really matters, because we know that things on the platform don't always happen at the most convenient times for all of us. So I want to make sure that you've seen this. This is our help center. It's that URL all the way at the top, help.twitter.com/forms, okay? This should be bookmarked on your website, on your browser, and it should be bookmarked on your mobile browser as well, because things happen when you're not at your desktop. This is kind of our one-stop shop for escalating any problems on the platform. And of course, there's a lot of reporting mechanisms that you can use inside the app when you're on the go. But what's important about this is most of these use cases here populate a ticket number and they get sent to your email address. And it's that ticket number and that paper trail that I can use and my team can use to help escalate any issues that you might run into. I've highlighted one in particular. This is a really frequent one that happens with our partners in the military, imposter accounts and impersonation. This is where you would start to take care of that by just going to help.twitter.com/forms, tap impersonation. It'll take you through a very quick reporting flow. And then you would just forward it to us, gov@twitter.com. That's our entire team, so it doesn't get bogged in one person's inbox. That's how you would escalate any kind of issues that you run into on platform. And now you're set up for go time. There's two other things on platform I want to talk to you about that will really help you digest Twitter efficiently and quickly. And one of those is mobile notifications. Mobile notifications are push notifications that get outside of the app. So instead of feeling like you have to be in the app all the time, just consuming this content, you can set mobile notifications for key accounts to alert you when they've tweeted or when they are using live video. So this is a really important way to help you digest as a content creator which accounts are really important for you to hear from, and you want to be the first to know about them. That's when you would enable mobile notifications for a particular account. So if there's a breaking news source that helps you know what's going on in the world, that's really helpful for mobile notifications. And it's also really helpful to digest whether you want to do it for all the tweets on that account or just when they go live on video. The screenshot you're seeing right now shows you how to opt into mobile notifications. So anytime you're following an account, there's a little bell that shows up right next to it. And if you just tap that bell, you'll see the next screen over, and it allows you to determine whether you want a mobile notification for every single tweet or just for when that account goes live with video. Mobile notifications are also a really good tool for informing your audience to opt into them. So let's say your account is the one actually managing the crisis and response and being the one to alert the public on particular items of interest. It would be worth sending out a tweet letting them know, hey, audience, you should opt into our mobile notifications so you get alerted instantly when we have an update to share. So there's two ways to think about mobile notifications. One, to keep yourself as a content creator in the know. And the second way to inform and instruct your audience to opt into them as well when it really matters. The last thing I want you to know when it comes to setting up content really efficiently, your consumption efficiently before crisis would ever hit, is lists. Lists are a game changer. I love lists. Everyone in this virtual room should love and be obsessed with lists. Lists are basically lists of accounts and profiles organized however you want them to. And they're really helpful because they parse out particular audiences on Twitter. There's a lot of great lists already out there. This is a great one from the DoD. This is the Pentagon Press Corps. So anyone who is already reporting on these defense issues, you could just tap follow that list, and you now see tweets from all these people in a particular list. That doesn't mean you followed all these accounts. It just means you've set them aside in a different part of your app, and it makes it really easy to consume the tweets from these particular people that are in the list. Of course, you can create your own lists if that's something you're interested in too. What I just showed you is if you wanted to subscribe to someone else's list. But if you wanted to create your own list so that you're really effectively set up to see all these different categories of audiences on Twitter, you would just go to your profile avatar and tap lists. And then you'll see either all the lists you're subscribed to or that little blue icon at the bottom where you can create a new list. Now, we're going to come back to the pinning thing in just a second here. But when you tap that create a new list icon, it's very much worth noting that you can create a private list or a public list. Private list means that no one can see who is included on that list. A public list means anyone could see who is included on that list. So think about that strategically if you're going to create lists that people might have an interest in. Let's go back to pinning real quick. So you see in the screenshot over to the left that there's a bunch of little blue pins there. This means that you can choose up to 5 of those lists and swipe between them on your home timeline. So instead of your lists being very buried and you kind of have to go find them through your navigation pane and all this stuff, you can actually pick 5. And then when you're looking at your home timeline, right when you open the app, just swipe left and you'll see the list that you have pinned there. It's a pretty cool product update that we've made in the last year or so that I think really elevates the importance of lists, especially for content creators. All right, we've talked a lot so far. We've got a little bit more to go through. We've talked about all the things you should be doing no matter what to really establish trust with your audience. We just talked about those 3 mechanisms you should have in place: our help center, where you should have that bookmarked, the mobile notifications and how to use those effectively, and also the Twitter list to really make sure that you're parsing out those audiences that matter. And now we're going to transition a little bit into what you need to keep in mind should you ever be on the tweeting end of an emergency or a crisis. So these are the things that you want to keep in mind when it's go time. And the key here is simplicity. Twitter is probably one of the most simple platforms that you're responsible for, and it really shines whenever we are struck in crisis and emergency. And so just because we're going back to simple tips right here, don't tune me out. These are kind of the things you want to remember should you be responsible for tweeting during a crisis and emergency. Your tweet breaks the news. So keep that in mind. It's more powerful than a press release. This is what journalists are going to pick up. This is what's going to be flashed up on TV. Make sure you've had the appropriate approvals on your side to do whatever you need to do, but your tweet will be the thing that breaks the news. So with that in mind, if you are at the center of an ongoing conversation, you want to make sure it's the first thing people see when they come to your profile. So please pin that news breaking tweet to the top of your feed. The third thing you'll want to keep in mind here is updating the public, and threads are a really helpful tool to do that because you've connected the entire conversation in context. Most people are very familiar with threads. If you're going to tweet something out into the open and you want to come back to that tweet later, you can just reply to it. That's one way to do it on both desktop and mobile devices. But there is a relatively recent update to being able to thread tweets from our compose box on Twitter. So I just wanted to show you that real quick. I'm going to let the video do the talking. So as you saw in that example here, the update that I'm referring to is being able to compose a tweet from your mobile device and just pull down on that tweet that you're composing, and you'll see the button to continue thread. Now, I know, of course, a lot of you are working with Hootsuite or Social Planner, so that's not the most relevant update for you, but just a little pro tip for you to be able to show friends and family. Back to the purposes of threads in the time of crisis and emergency. Threads are also really helpful as couplets for whenever you need to use 2 different languages. And I think that's something that's really, really important to keep in mind, that there may be multiple audiences you need to reach during crisis and emergency. So don't be afraid to use threads as a tool for multiple languages. The 4th thing you really want to keep in mind when we're back to these basics of having to execute during times of emergency is using a really clear CTA. So like, no matter what you want your audience to do, you have to tell them. And these are some of my favorite words to use inside of tweet copy that really helps your audience effectively know what to do. Retweet, tap. I say tap because most people are on mobile consuming Twitter. So it's a much more mobile friendly kind of CTA rather than click. Use a particular hashtag, watch the live video update. If you're asking them to take action off of Twitter, tell them to do that. Call. DM is a really helpful tool. So like opening your DMs during times of crisis and emergency can be a really strategic opportunity for you if you're going to be managing inbounds from your direct messaging. And of course, enabling mobile notifications like we talked about a little bit earlier. In sum, keep it simple, clear, and calm. This is a really great example from the Toronto Police Department during a bombing situation that they had to encounter and diffuse, share updates with the audience. So you can see that they've come back to this thread with significant updates. They've given people very clear call to actions. And this is just a great example of something that you would do during an emergency situation. The last thing I want to talk a little bit about during emergency and crisis is your hashtag strategy. And frankly, we just need to talk about hashtags. Let's bring it in, bring it in. If you've toned me out, like if you don't walk away with anything else, let's talk a little bit about hashtags and how to effectively use them during go time and emergencies and a little bit of all the time. Let's remember what hashtags do. Hashtags connect us to conversation that's already happening, okay? And there's 3 kind of ways that you can utilize hashtags. 1, you can start a hashtag to organize and consolidate content among a particular group of peers. So hashtag Know Your Mill is a great example of a hashtag that was started, is consistently kept up, and kind of organizes all this content in the same theme. The second way you can use a hashtag is to join one that's already established. And I'm not talking about like hashtag education or kind of adding a hashtag in front of words that you think may be trending or happening. I'm talking about ones like, we're established, we use these all the time. And then the third way for you to use a hashtag to tap into trending conversations. So these are conversations that can be planned, like fun content things like hashtag World Emoji Day. This is also the kind of hashtag that you're going to be using if there's ever natural disasters that you're responding to. It's something that's trending. It takes on kind of a life of its own. And I'll show you an example here on how to utilize that in just a second. But this pro tip is worth sharing. Gone are the days of like 7 hashtags in a tweet. We don't do that anymore. It looks spammy. It's not great. And you know what? You just gave your audience 7 different opportunities to leave your tweet because all hashtags are hyperlinked. So I want you to reorient and think a little bit about what's included in your tweet copy and no more than 3 items that could take them away from that tweet. And that includes not just hashtags, that includes an @ mention, that includes a article that you may be pointing someone to, or a spot on your website. It's just a really good rule of thumb. You don't need more opportunities for your audience to leave that tweet and not give you some of those engagement metrics that you're really interested in. Of course, 3 is not a hard and fast rule. If that's really upsetting to you and you need at least 5 things in there, you do you. But what I'm saying is we want to isolate the amount of opportunities that we're giving people to actually leave the tweet and not engage with it. That includes hashtags, @mentions, all that goodness. Okay. Public service announcement over on hashtags. Back to that third point there, when we're talking about trending conversations, and particularly during disasters. At the very top of our chat, I talked about display names in your profile and how that's the most powerful piece of search in addition to your bio. And let me show you what I mean by that. You can make your profile searchable by what you include in that display name. And so here's an example from Hurricane Dorian recently. Oops. These nonprofits here, these Red Cross chapters, ended up including Hurricane Dorian in their display whenever this was a trending conversation happening on platform. And even though I don't follow any of these Red Cross chapters here, when I began to type in hurricane into the search bar, they are one of the things that show up for me. And so this is one of the ways you should think about hashtag strategy should you ever be faced with an ongoing conversation that elicits kind of a crisis and emergency response tactics. Whew, I'm tired. We covered so much ground there, talked about the things that you should be doing all the time to really establish trust with your audience so they know you're there, you know you're real, you're having conversation with them proactively. The few tactics that you can do to set yourself up well for effective consumption of Twitter ahead of time. And then we ran through some very brief, simple reminders should you ever be put in a situation where you're tweeting during a crisis and emergency. But all of this ties back to the mission, Twitter's mission, to serve the public conversation. And frankly, our mission is very similar to yours. You are public servants. Twitter is simply an extension of that work. And that's our really big idea for today. All right, some next steps for you before we open up Q&A. If you don't try anything else, aside from maybe the hashtag thing, because seriously, we got to get the hashtags under control. You want to experiment a little bit with conversation. The way Twitter is trending, that is what will really set you apart as leaders in this space and transform your influence with your audience. So as you feel comfortable, whether it's a reply to someone else, whether it's inviting conversation upon you, or maybe it's a full Twitter Q&A strategy, try incorporating some of that more of that conversation a little bit more proactively. The second thing, next step for you, if you are very curious about that blue badge verification I mentioned at the top, or the Media Studio enrollment, please email your handles, your usernames, to Kwande, and he's gonna collaborate all those for me and our team so we can batch upload everyone really quickly. If you email us all individually, it'll take a really long time. So work with Kwande and we are going to make sure that you have access to what you need. And then the last thing, if you don't want to have to wait until you get to talk to Twitter or hear from us, every so often, I've built a little Twitter list for you. From our Twitter Gov account that has the main accounts that break news about Twitter's product, policy updates, any kind of support issues we may be experiencing, best practices, case studies. All of that is in the Twitter list that this QR code links to. So if you want resources immediately right now today, you want to learn more and dive in, go ahead and just follow this list. If you ever need to reach out to our team, you always can. That's us. gov@twitter.com. That's me. That's and 3 other people because we are a small but mighty team. But we will help you out. You know where to reach us. We're so thankful to be a part of this community and really appreciate the time to get to talk with you today. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions.
Lauren, that was a really awesome presentation, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. I don't. Do we have any questions from the audience at all? I feel like someone's trying to unmute themselves and keeps muting.
Silence is either the best sign or the worst sign. There's no middle ground there.
I just want to say that was awesome.
Well, good.
My mind is blown.
Well, that's good. I hope it wasn't too much information. It was quite the fire hose.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, sorry. I don't know what's going on with my computer today. Hi, this is Josephine Pride. I work with USMA Public Affairs. My question is about when tweeting content on social media. So I guess the problem I run into a lot is varying the content I put on Facebook versus Instagram versus Twitter. And I think I heard somewhere before, like, you shouldn't repurpose content that you've already placed on Instagram or Facebook or however the case may be. And because I'm one person, it kind of gets hard to try to vary it all the time. So I guess what I'm asking is there a best practice when you're trying to keep your audience engaged and not also put the same content out everywhere on the same platform?
Yeah, I hear you. That is so tough to be responsible for creating for several different platforms and just being one person. And ultimately, some of the advice that you've heard about really creating different kind of cultures on all these different platforms is true, because you want, if you're trying to get following in all of these different places, you want to give them a reason to follow in all these different places. And that can sometimes be because there's something different on Twitter than there would be on Instagram and vice versa. So in a golden scenario world, there would be a little bit of strategy about that, but that's not what we have to work with right now, right? So if we are looking at posting the same kind of content across different platforms, what I would strongly discourage is just a copy and paste blanket. So what we don't want is the exact same text in the exact same format with the exact same graphic. What we might want to do is just think about what plays well on each of those. So maybe for Twitter, we shorten up the content a little bit. Maybe we don't even need the graphic on Twitter because text plays really well on Twitter. Whereas on Instagram, you certainly wouldn't post anything without some sort of imagery. So I think there's a way to not necessarily have to create 3 different kinds of content, but take the same content and just make it fit a little bit for what plays well on each of those platforms.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Of course.
So we're seeing a lot more reliance, like as kind of the years go on Twitter as being this first mover with a crisis. If something happens, it's on Twitter first. So where is that going? Like, where does Twitter see that that kind of a first mover advantage evolving as we get more reliant on the platform to be our source for crisis comm?
Yeah, I candidly don't think it's going anywhere, just because that's the way the platform is built. It's this public space, it's real time, and it's reach because of that nature right there. And we've democratized the ability for anyone to put that information out there, right? So I believe, honestly, by the time this plays, this may be a little bit of old news, but people found out about the bombing in Lebanon recently in Beirut on Twitter because of what people were posting there. And I think it also speaks to the audience who is there. People on Twitter are naturally a bit more inclined. They're kind of the activist community. There are the people that help brands launch new products and lean into that. And so I don't foresee the constituencies of Twitter really changing as far as the people that are like really tuned in and activists in their community. But you know, the one thing we know for sure is that nothing is certain. So in the meantime, I think just continuing to prepare yourself for consuming breaking news really quickly, and then also being prepared and feeling comfortable to break your own news on Twitter.
Thank you.
What else? It's a great question.
So I have a question. What is Twitter doing, or do they have any plans to combat the growing and very well established mis and disinformation campaigns?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that, because it's something that all of us are wrapped into daily, whether that's meetings internally or externally. And so we're making strides in this. We're aware, we're imperfect. But I really, it's interesting because COVID-19 has forced a lot of innovation in product. So I'll just use this as an example. Now, anytime you come to Twitter, information that's sourced from trusted counterparts is shown in every single part of the app. So whether that's when you open your app at the top of the home timeline, there's a little COVID-19 box. If you were to go to trending and search on a little explore tab, there's a whole tab designated to COVID-19 trending breaking stories and curated content that we have vetted from trusted sources, so that is what's rising to the top. Same with our search prompts. So if you were to go into Twitter search and type in kind of keywords around coronavirus, you would be shown first, before you see any of the search content, a prompt that then points you to the CDC or whatever market you're in, the trusted public government source on that. So we are certainly working on innovations to address this with both the product and policies. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, I have a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
So with it being a truly democratic, open source, kind of anybody can add it, is there any pushback on, unfortunately, everybody has, you know, the freedom of speech, which means you can say things unless, you know, you're going to cause, you know, mass panic. Even mis and disinformation is still your freedom of speech. Is there any pushback from personnel or organizations that do put out either completely false or partially false information and having that flagged being unfalse? Because it could be considered that, well, you just don't agree with what I'm saying, and that's why I'm being flagged.
Sure. Two parts to that. One being using the COVID-19 example again to Twitter is becoming more proactive in labeling some of this content rather than removing it. So not taking down someone's opportunity to feel like they have their voice heard, but if there's truly misleading information there, labeling it and redirecting a user if they saw that label and tapping through to trusted content. So that's just one additional piece to the COVID-19 conversation there. The second piece is really enabling our users with choice. So this is a theme among high risk. So this can be a little bit touchy in the government space, but every single user has the ability to hide replies. It's a little bit different than like Facebook and deleting comments or hiding comments. There's still full transparency that the author of a particular tweet has hidden replies, and they could go through and see which replies you have hidden. But that helps kind of let people know that this behavior is off, and we, or like me as the user and the author, don't agree with this. And then there's some other kind of tools and experiments happening on platform to give users choice on who can reply and engage with their content. So there's some new product features coming soon about controlling who can reply to your outbound tweets. And so that's kind of in theme of this conversation around choice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
So, kind of given the audience that we're going to have for this, if you could kind of switch roles with them, and now you're sitting in a public affairs office talking to a senior military leader or someone who's leading installation, how would you go about acting authentically on Twitter, being a human on that platform?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I know it's a struggle that so many people are up against. I think being able to pinpoint key examples of what you would want to do. So if you're trying to move the needle on a kind of tactic, showing that example to a counterpart or a boss who has the decision-making power there, showing how it played really well with someone else, and then saying, like, this is why we need to do that. Look at these, retweets, look at these likes, look at the amount of people that had conversation and the great stories that came out of this, and being able to point to other folks that have done it really well, and use them as a guideline there, I think is definitely one thing to keep in mind. But I know it's not a ship that's easy to turn. So there's a lot of empathy there, but I'm hoping that just even having this discussion today, you can hear from the source about what works really well if you want to be effective on social media.
Thank you.
Lauren, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I want to start to wrap it up now. But is your team available to anyone within the DoD to reach out for any questions, comments, concerns, or anything along those lines?
Sure, that email address, gov@twitter.com, that I dropped at the end of the presentation, that's our team. So we also get being a very stretched team with lots to cover. It's literally 3 of us that handle coast to coast, local to federal, candidates to already elected, and agencies and military while we're at it. So we always appreciate a little bit of patience and empathy when you come out, but we'll try and get it addressed really, really quickly.
Awesome. Well, we definitely appreciate your time and coming through, and we'll continue any questions or anything like that. I'll make sure I keep you in the loop as far as contacts for me, as far as that program that's available to the service members.
Sounds
Again,
great.
we appreciate everything you said and everything you delivered. It was a really great course. Anything you want to, any parting words for us? Words of wisdom?
Thank you very much, and thank you for your service. It's wonderful to be here.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.